The Enfield Poltergeist... The story is based on true events that took place in Enfield, England in the late 1970s. The Hodgson family began experiencing strange occurrences in their home, which were suspected to be poltergeist activity. In a modest house in Brimstown, Enfield, England, Peggy Hodgson lives with her 4 children, Margaret 14, Janet 11, Johnny 10, and Billy 7. After separating from her husband, Peggy struggles to provide for her family. Although their life is not easy, they still try to live their days with hope. However, that night, the Hodgson family's life turned into a nightmare they never imagined. The first strange incident occurred in August 1977, when Janet and Johnny heard a knocking sound coming from the wall of their room. At first, Peggy dismissed it as just the usual noise from the house's old pipes. However, as the knocking sound grew louder and was accompanied by strange vibrations in Janet's bed, Peggy began to feel that something was wrong. The incident became even more terrifying when the wardrobe in the corner of the children's room began to move by itself. Peggy tried to put the cupboard back in place, but with an invisible force, the cupboard was pushed forward again as if someone was pushing it. Unable to stand the fear, Peggy took her children out of the house and ran to the house of the nearest neighbors, the Nottinghams. That night, together with the Nottinghams, they decided to call the police. 2 officers came, one of whom was a policewoman named Carolyn Heaps. When they investigated the house, they were shocked by an unexplained occurrence. Carolyn saw with her own eyes a chair in the living room move, shifting a few inches from its original position. Carolyn, in her report, stated that she tried to find a logical explanation, but found nothing that could explain the movement. However, since no crime had occurred, the police left without being able to do much. The next day, the strange occurrences continued. Janet began to complain of noises coming not only from the walls, but also from the floor and ceiling. Small objects, such as children's toys, were often thrown around for no reason, and doors in the house opened and closed by themselves. As time went on, these phenomena became more and more severe. At one point, Janet even felt her body being lifted from the bed without anyone touching her. Feeling at her wits' end and extremely frightened, Peggy called a minister from the local church. The minister, having witnessed several unexplained phenomena himself, recommended that Peggy contact the Association for Psychical Research, SPR, an organization that investigates paranormal events. 2 investigators, Maurice Gross and Guy Lyon Playfair, were sent to look into the case. When Gross and Playfair arrive, they are immediately greeted with an atmosphere full of anxiety. On their first night in the house, Gross hears a knocking sound coming from the walls, while Playfair sees objects moving for no reason. They quickly realize that what is happening in the Hodgson house is not a simple trick. There is something truly strange about the house. Their research went on for months, and the longer they stayed there, the more phenomena they witnessed. Janet would often become possessed. Her eyes would roll back, her body would tense up, and she would begin to speak in a horrifying, raspy voice. The voice, which was clearly not that of a little girl, claimed to be Bill Wilkins, an elderly man who had died in the house years before. Gross and Playfair recorded several sessions in which Janet spoke to the voice of Bill. The voice claimed that she had died in a living room chair from a cerebral hemorrhage, and that she was unaware that she had died. When they investigated the history of the house, they discovered that Bill's claims were true. A man named Bill Wilkins had lived in the house and died in the same manner as Janet had claimed while possessed. Janet herself was confused and frightened by what was happening to her. She often had no recollection of what she said or did while possessed. Her body would float off the bed, and on one occasion, Gross and Playfair witnessed Janet being pushed across the room by an unseen force. The strange phenomena occurred not only at night, but also during the day, even when investigators and other witnesses were present. Gross and Playfair documented more than 2,000 unexplained occurrences during their investigation, including knocking sounds, objects moving on their own, and changes in Janet's voice and behavior. However, not everyone believed the Hodgson's claims. Some journalists and skeptics suspected that the incident was a hoax created by Janet and her siblings to gain attention. On one occasion, Janet and Margaret were caught trying to bend a spoon with their hands, further raising doubts about the authenticity of the case. However, Cross and Playfair remain convinced that most of the events that occur cannot be explained by fraud or childish play. They argue that while some events may be faked by children to seek attention, there are many phenomena that are far beyond human ability to engineer. Janet's condition worsened as time went on. She became more possessed, and her behavior became increasingly uncontrollable. One particularly terrifying night, Janet reportedly woke up with a very pale face. Her voice became hoarse than usual, and she began speaking in a language that no one in the house could understand. Objects around her fell on their own. Mirrors in the room shattered, and doors slammed shut even though there was no wind. Feeling unable to handle the situation any longer, Peggy decided to send Janet to a mental hospital for evaluation. However, after a series of psychological tests, the doctors found no mental disorder in Janet that could explain her symptoms. Instead, they noted that although Janet often behaved strangely, there were no signs that she was mentally ill. Back from the hospital, Janet seemed calmer for a time. However, the strange events continued, albeit at a lower intensity. As time went on, the poltergeist activity in the Hodgson home slowly subsided. Janet grew into a teenager, and the terrifying events seemed like a dark nightmare from their past. Years later, Janet, now an adult, recalled the strange experiences she had. In an interview, she said that while some of the events could be explained by skepticism, many of them she still cannot understand to this day. She admitted that there were moments when she felt like she was being toyed with by forces far beyond her control or understanding. The Enfield Poltergeist case remains one of the most famous and controversial in British paranormal history. Although many doubted its authenticity, several investigators, including Maurice Grosse, died convinced that what they witnessed at the Hodgson house was real, something that science has yet to explain. For the Hodgson family, the experience left deep emotional scars. Although the poltergeist activity eventually stopped, the trauma of the incident still haunts them, especially Janet. For many, this story is just another ghost story. But for those who experienced it, it is a nightmare that can never be forgotten. The story of the Enfield Poltergeist remains one of the greatest mysteries in the paranormal world. Regardless of belief or skepticism, the events that occurred at the Hodgson family home have left a deep mark on the world of paranormal investigation, a subject of debate to this day.